The Velthrani don't think much of silence. I learned that about 20 minutes into my first posting at the conclave of Thresh, when Ambassador Orovith leaned across to his aide and whispered something in High Velthrani that translated, roughly, "The ape is sleeping with its eyes open," I kept writing. My name is Lena Vasic. I was 29 years old, a junior cultural attaché on temporary secondment to the Human Coalition's observer seat at the conclave, a body that managed access rights to 7 contested transit corridors and had, by most estimates, the political warmth of a cooling engine block. I had been selected for the posting, partly because I had a working knowledge of 4 galactic trade dialects, and partly, I suspect, because my supervisor needed someone patient enough to sit through a 40-hour session and not cause a diplomatic incident. She was not wrong on either count. The conclave chamber at Thresh Station was tall and cold and smelled faintly of ozone. The Velthrani took up most of one curved wall. 12 delegates in layered ceremonial plumage, the senior members displaying the full spread of their secondary feathers in a posture that, in their culture, signals absolute authority and mild contempt for everyone else in the room. The Grethkai occupied the opposite arc, their segmented forms draped in status sessage, occasionally clicking to one another in their subsonic register. 2 other species rounded out the gallery, and then there was the human seat, 1 small desk, 1 chair, 1 coalition flag that had been placed slightly behind the sightline of the primary holoprojector, as if by accident. I pulled my chair forward, adjusted the flag, and opened my notebook. It was a paper notebook, the Velthrani noticed, one of them, a junior delegate, bright copper feathers still growing in at the crest, nudged the one beside her and made a gesture toward my desk. They exchanged a quiet trill that I will not translate here because it would only be embarrassing for them in retrospect. I wrote down the time, the date, and the session number. I wrote down who was sitting where. Then I wrote down the trill and what it meant. The session opened with the standard procedural recitation, which took 40 minutes because the Velthrani had filed 3 amendments to the order. Business, each of which had to be read aloud in full in all 6 recognized conclave languages. I drank my tea. I wrote notes. Grethkai clicked at intervals in their subsonic register. A running commentary none of the other delegations were supposed to follow. I could follow about a third of it. Mostly it was complaints about the temperature. The ambient temperature in the chamber had dropped 2 degrees since the session opened. Because the Velthrani prefer it that way and because, as senior bloc, they had submitted the environmental preference form first. No one had submitted a counterform. I had not known there was a counterform. I wrote a note to look into that after the session. Ambassador Orovith took the floor first, as he always did. He was a large male in his diplomatic prime, his crest plumage a deep iridescent green-black that shifted color when he moved. Status display so refined that even the Grethkai delegates, who had no feathers and no particular reason to care, kept glancing at him. He spoke at length about the Human Coalition's proposed amendments to the access schedule, which he described, in High Velthrani, as the administrative equivalent of a hatchling trying to renegotiate the position of the sun. The simultaneous translation rendered this procedurally suboptimal. I wrote down what he actually said. He went on. The Human Coalition, he suggested, had a habit of proposing frameworks that assumed a certain, he searched for the word, parity of standing with the senior members of this body. He found this charming. He used the Velthrani word that means charming in the way that small animals are charming. The translation system rendered it as earnest. Several of his delegation twittered quietly. I finished my tea. The session went on in this fashion for the better part of 2 hours. Various delegates made their positions known. The Velthrani bloc was systematic about it. They had spent considerable time before the session aligning their vote on the access revision, which would have the effect of downgrading the Human Coalition from primary corridor access to supplemental access pending review. A category that, in practice, meant waiting. For years, while others moved freely through transit routes that the Human Coalition had helped survey, map, and in 2 cases physically clear of debris at considerable cost in equipment and personnel. I wrote this down too, the sequence of it, seconded whom, and when, and in what order. It is the kind of things that seems like clerical habit until it isn't. Orovith called for the preliminary alignment vote with 20 minutes left in the session. Standard procedure, not binding. It establishes the shape of the final count, and, more to the point, it tells everyone in the room which way the wind is blowing. The Velthrani block was unified. The Grethkai were split. The two smaller delegations were watching which way the larger ones moved. It was, by any fair reading, a well-executed piece of corridor politics. They had been patient. They had been methodical. They had done everything correctly. Kurovith smoothed his primary feathers, the gesture his species makes when they are about to say something they consider final, and he addressed the chamber in High Velthrani rather than the session's official trade dialect. A calculated choice, since technically any delegate could be assumed to be working from translation only. He said that the human coalition had demonstrated, across this session and several preceding ones, a consistent and observable tendency toward. The word he used was Kelvisara, which has no clean translation, but lands somewhere between becoming stillness and the quietude of a creature that has given up. He said it without looking at me. He said it the way you say something when you're confident the person it's aimed at doesn't understand the language. I set down my pen. I want to be precise about what I said next, because there is a version of this story where the human gives a speech. A version where she stands up and explains everything she's observed, and outlines the procedural violations, and delivers a comprehensive rebuttal. That is not what happened. What I did was wait until Orovith finished, and then I said, in High Velthrani, not trade dialect, not the simplified register used for interspecies courtesy, but the full formal High Velthrani used for binding diplomatic record, that I wanted to note 1C procedural matter before the preliminary alignment was entered into the session log. The chamber got quiet in a specific way, the way a room gets quiet when something is shifted, and not everyone has caught up yet. I said that under Article 14 of the Conclave Charter, session proceedings are recorded in full and filed as public record in the language in which they are spoken. Said that I had been taking contemporaneous notes in High Velthrani since the session opened, which I would be submitting as my delegation's official addendum to the transcript, as was my right under the same article. I said it the way you state a weather forecast. Then I thanked the chamber for its time. Orovith's crest feathers did something I had not seen them do before. They went very flat. His secondary display, the iridescent green-black that had been catching the light all session, folded in. It is the Velthrani equivalent of a sharp intake of breath, except it happens on the outside, where everyone can see it. The junior delegate with the copper crest had gone quite still. Preliminary alignment vote did not happen that session. Orovith called a recess. The recess lasted 90 minutes. When the session resumed, the Velthrani bloc had tabled the access revision pending further multilateral consultation, which is the diplomatic way of saying, we need to think about what we just did. The human coalition's access status remained unchanged. I packed up my notebook, capped my pen, and thanked the session clerk, in High Velthrani, for keeping such thorough records. She was a Grethkai, and she did not speak Velthrani, so she understood exactly none of it, but she appreciated the tone. I have been back to the conclave of Thresh 6 times since that session. Orovith still leads the Velthrani delegation. He is, I will say, an excellent diplomat, precise, well-prepared, genuinely skilled at reading a room. He speaks trade dialect now when he addresses the full chamber. I still bring the paper notebook. I still write in it throughout every session. I notice the Velthrani delegates have stopped commenting on it, which suits me fine. There is a word in High Velthrani for the quality of a person who seems quiet and turns out not to be. It is not Kelvisara. It is something closer to the stillness of water before it boils. Orovith knows I know the word. He knew the moment I opened my mouth in his language, 2 hours into a session in which I had not said a single thing. We have not discussed it. We do not need to.